Okay, so let us start. So I have done these pictures just to remind you of what we did in the first lecture. So if you forgot everything about the first lecture, it's not too bad because I'm going to record the notation and the result we will use today. Okay, so the starting point is a sequence theta 1, theta 2 of independent trees, and these are, in my notation, mu Galton-Watson trees. Okay, so it just means that you have, for each tree, you have, okay, one ancestor, and the tree corresponds to the genealogy of the descendants of this ancestor. And it's called the Galton-Watson tree if each individual has a number of children, a number of offspring, according to the probability distribution mu. Okay? And independently, of course, for the different individuals in the population. Okay? Okay, so you take a sequence of such trees, and essentially what I explained in the last lecture, that you can code such a sequence. In fact, I did it for a single tree, but it also works for a sequence. You can code such a sequence by certain random functions. And the first one you can consider is the height function, or maybe I will call it here the height process. Okay? And this is very easy to define. You have your sequence of trees, and essentially, okay, so these are plain trees in the sense that you have an order on the children of every individual. So you can visit, in fact, the individuals of the trees in lexicographical ordering. So you start, say at time 0, you are here at the bottom of the first tree, and then you jump to the next individual of the tree, this one, and then to this one, okay, and so on, like this. And when you are finished, when you have visited all the individuals of the first tree, well, you jump to the root of the second tree, and so on. Okay? Okay, and you continue like that. Now, what is the height process? What it tells you at step n, what is the generation you are visiting at that time. Okay, so I started from 0, of course, here. I jumped to an individual of generation 1, then to an individual of generation 2. I stayed at 2, and then I jumped back to 0, etc. Okay? So it's a way of coding the trees, in fact, which is very convenient. And in fact, we introduced a different way of coding the tree, which is what I call the Lukasiewicz path. And here it's similar. You imagine that you visit the individuals in your sequence of trees in the way I explained. But now, at each step, you add the number of children of the individual you are visiting minus 1. Okay, so I always start from 0. Well, at the first step, I am at the ancestor here. In my example here, it has just one child. So I add 1 minus 1, so I stay at 0, in fact. Okay? And then I visit this individual. It has 2 children. So I add 2 minus 1, so I added plus 1. Here I had no child. I added minus 1. The same here, minus 1. And so I get this yellow curve here. And what you can notice is that the times at which I finish exploring a tree and I jump to the root of the next tree, they correspond to hitting levels of negative integers. For instance, here, this is the hitting level of minus 1 for Sn, and that time here corresponds to the moment I have visited all vertices of the first tree and I have jumped to the root of the second one, okay? And so on. Okay, so essentially if you want to recover the sequence of trees, for instance, if you look at the height process, it's very easy because essentially you look at excursions away from 0 for the height process. So what do I mean by excursions? I mean a part of the red path here between two successive zeros. So this is the first zero, this is the second zero. And you see that this part of the height process corresponds to the exploration of the first tree. Similarly, the second excursion here corresponds to the second tree. And here I have a kind of trivial excursion, but it corresponds to a tree where I have just the root. This may happen, okay. And so on. Okay. So really, you can recover, if you want, the individual height functions associated with each of the trees in the sequence by looking here at the excursions. Okay? Now, if you consider the Lukasiewicz path, well, in a sense, this looks like a less nice object. Well, you don't see clearly how you can recover information on the trees from the yellow curve here. But there is a nice formula which tells you that you can recover the height process from the Lukasiewicz path. Okay? So this is the formula I stated last time. It says that Sn can be recovered as the number of integers j between 0, 1, and n minus 1, which have the properties that, sorry, it's not Sn, it's Hn. Sj is equal to the minimum for L between j and n of Sl. Okay, so this is a formula. In fact, I proved it last time when I was considering a single tree. But the extension to a sequence, is very easy. Okay, so for the moment, everything I said was true for a deterministic sequence of trees. Now comes probability. The fact that I'm considering mu Galton-Watson trees tells me another thing. While the Lukasiewicz path has a nice structure, so this process Sn is just a random walk on Z with jump distribution given by mu of k. So the jump distribution is essentially the same as mu, but shifted. So mu of k is mu of k plus 1 for any integers greater than minus 1. Okay? Okay, so we saw that last time. And so just the sum of independent random variables distributed according to this nu. Okay, so now what is the basic idea of what I'm going to do today? Well, from the probabilistic point of view, the Lukasiewicz path is very nice. Just a random walk, and we know a lot about random walks. In particular, we have scaling limits. We know that the suitably scaled random walk converges to Brownian motion under certain assumptions I will give. And so we know very well the asymptotics of this yellow function. Okay, and now we can use the formula that is above to get also information on the height process. And in turn, this will tell you, well, this will tell us a lot of things about the trees. Okay, okay, this is a rough idea. And maybe I should now state my assumptions more precisely. So I will assume that mu is critical. So this means that the mean of mu is equal to 1. Okay? So last time I was considering critical or subcritical. Now I want to have a critical offspring distribution. Okay? And I keep assuming, as I did last time, that I avoid the trivial case where mu of 1 would be equal to 1. Okay. Okay, and second assumption, I will assume that mu has finite variance. Okay, just saying that the sum of k squared mu of k is finite. Okay, so then the variance of mu is okay, like then I will set sigma square, variance of mu. So it's not this sum, it's this sum minus 1, or if you prefer, the sum of k minus 1 squared mu of k. Okay? And of course, because nu is just mu shifted, this is the same as the variance of nu. Okay. Okay. And by my assumption, of course, since I exclude this case, this variance is strictly positive. Okay. Okay. So why do I do these assumptions? Well, now I can state asymptotics for the random walk capital S. Perhaps something I should have said earlier is the fact that mu is critical, that mu has mean 1. So this implies that nu, so maybe a remark, mu has mean 0, and the random walk S is recurrent. Okay, I will use that later, in fact. Well, on my picture, it does not look recurrent. It looks like going down, but maybe I had not considered a critical case. Okay, so I'm going to use now Donsker theorem. Which gives you the convergence of rescaled random walks to Brownian motion. And so this theorem says here for the random walk capital S that if I look at 1 over square root of P, S at time pt, as a function of the real parameter t. So here I have to make a remark. Here I look capital S at the real time. So I need to define St for t real. I can do it, for instance, by linear interpolation. Okay. In fact, this is what I'm doing here. If you look at the yellow curve, it's precisely this linear interpolation. Okay. And I will do that each time it's necessary to extend the discrete function to real values of the parameter. Okay? So Donsker theorem tells you that this converges in distribution as p tends to infinity to sigma times bt, where b is a standard linear Brownian motion. Okay. So maybe I should say a few words about this convergence. So this convergence in distribution is in a functional sense. Okay? So meaning the following thing. If I take the expected value of a certain function of this, so I view this as a random continuous function. This has to converge when p tends to infinity to the expected value of the same function applied to the limit. Well, this does not hold for any function f, so capital F has to be bounded and continuous. On which space? On the space of continuous functions, okay? Or continuous functions from R plus into R. Okay, so I don't write down the definition of this notation. It's a space of continuous function from R plus into the real line. Okay? Mm-hmm. And what does it mean continuous here? This space is equipped with the usual topology, which is a topology of a uniform convergence on every compact set. Okay. Okay, so that's the definition of this convergence in distribution, in fact. Okay. So perhaps I will make a remark about that. I will introduce some notation. I will write In. This will be, so set. This will be the minimum value of Sk for k less than n. And I will also need the maximal value. Okay. So essentially, this minimum, okay, if you look at this capital S as function of the real parameter by linear interpolation, while the minimum on over a finite interval will be a continuous function of the path. Okay? So a consequence of the result which is here is that you can state maybe a slightly more general convergence by looking not only at the random walk but also at its minimum. Okay? And what you get in the limit, well, you already know what you get for the first component because it's Brownian motion multiplied by sigma. And here for the second component, well, it's just the infimum. This is the infimum up to time pt, with the same rescaling. So what you will get is simply the infimum process of the Brownian motion, which I denote in this way, be underlined, t equals the minimum of bs. Okay. So, I mean, there is nothing deep there. It's just an immediate consequence. Once you have this, you also get this because, well, as I said before, you look at the infimum of this function over a time interval. This is a continuous function of the path, and it's in the sense that it's continuous with respect to the uniform topology on compact intervals. Okay? So maybe I don't say too much about that. It's really something standard. But I'm going to use that. This way I wanted to mention it. Okay? Okay, so maybe I can just now state the result. So the result will say that the height process, if you rescale it properly, it will also have a certain scaling limit. And you see the scaling limit, of course, of this red curve cannot be Brownian motion because it stays non-negative. Okay? Brownian motion does not stay positive. But it's going to be a process very simply related to Brownian motion. This red curve is going to converge after rescaling simply to the absolute value of a Brownian motion. Okay? So maybe I can state the theorem. So I rescale this h function. So same remark as before for the fact that I define it here by linear interpolation for real values of the parameter. This converges in distribution as p tends to infinity. What you get, well, I will write it in the following way. There is a constant, which is not sigma now, it's 2 over sigma, and times a certain process, which I will denote by gamma t. And this gamma t, well, in fact, in the proof, you will see that gamma t appears as Brownian motion minus its minimum. Okay? And there is a standard result. So I asked Dimash Elkak about that, and he told me that in the first semester he mentioned its result to you. So I hope you remember. So this, when you look at a Brownian motion minus its minimum, this is in fact a reflected Brownian motion. So reflected Brownian motion is the same, if you want, as the absolute value of a Brownian motion. Okay, so gamma t has the same distribution here, okay, as the absolute value of a Brownian motion. Okay? Mm-hmm. So maybe I can draw a couple of pictures to explain that. So very briefly. So suppose you have a Brownian motion. Something like this, okay? Okay, so this is Bt, if you want. And suppose now you look at this minimum process here, B underlined T. So give you something like this, okay? Maybe like this, and so on. You can continue like this, okay? And then what you do, when you consider this difference here, Bt minus the minimum, you shift all the excursions above the yellow curve. So essentially, well, I'm not going to succeed to do it very well, but essentially what you get at that moment, well, here you have some small excursions. This bigger one here shifted like this, and so on. This small one, maybe this bigger one now. Okay, and so on. Okay, so this gives you the process if you want dt minus the minimum. Okay, and okay, so the famous theorem I was mentioning is the fact that the process that you get here has the same distribution as the absolute value of a real Brownian motion. Okay, so it's also a nice process. We know a lot about it. Okay, so I'm going to prove this theorem. Well, in fact, I'm going to prove something slightly weaker. I'm going to prove only the convergence of finite dimensional marginals, but maybe I will say a few words, and maybe you can do the full proof in the exercise session. We will see. Okay. So, no question till now? Okay. So, what is the general idea? Well, as I said before, we know everything about capital S. Well, we know this convergence, Donsker theorem. And we know that H is also a function of capital S. Okay. So you could say, well, capital S converges in some sense after rescaling. So you should be able to deduce from this convergence also the convergence of H rescaled. Okay. But it's not so easy because here you have something which is really not at all a continuous function of the path. And so you cannot directly get information about this bit bizarre function of capital S from the convergence that you have here. Okay? So it's not like for the infimum. The infimum is a very nice function. Here it's a more complicated function of S if you want. Okay? So you need to do something else. Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, I will start with some discrete results, in fact. So I need to introduce, I'm sorry, there is a lot of notation here, but I will try to keep the relevant notation. I will introduce Kn. This is the cardinality of the set of J between 1 and n, which have the properties that Sj is equal to Mj. Okay, so remember, so S is your random walk, capital M is the past maximum, if you want, of the random walk. So these are the times at which your random walk equals its maximum up to the same time. Okay, so these are sometimes called the record times. Okay, a time at which you are better than at all the times before. Well, better, at least as good as all the times before. Okay, so I have this notation, and now I will use a lemma, which is telling you that if you look at the pair Sn minus In, Hn, this has the same distribution as Mn Kn. Okay, so we are going to prove that it's not at all a difficult result, you will see, but it's going to be very useful for us. Okay? So this is for every fixed and okay. It's not true, of course, as a process in n. In fact. Okay, so why is it true? Well, probably I should do the proof on a picture, but okay, I will write some details. So I will set S hat nk equals Sn minus Sn minus k for k between 0 and n. So it's a kind of time reversal of the random walk, if you want. And I claim that, so n is fixed in everything. I look at the vector S hat n0, S hat n1, and so on. Up to S hat nn. I claim that this has the same distribution as S0, S1, Sn. Okay? So why is it true? Well, the fact that n is a random walk, you know that n is equal to psi1 plus, well, we'll write it this way. Sk is equal to psi1 plus psi2 plus psi Well, these random variables are independent and with low nu. And what is this quantity? Well, if you have this representation here, what you get for S hat nk, this will be simply psi n plus psi n minus 1 plus psi n minus k plus 1. Okay? So you see that for this S hat n, what you do exactly the same. You add independent variables distributed according to nu, and you just don't take the same sequence of psi random variables, but you reverse the sequence. Okay? So it should be clear that then the two sequences have the same distribution. Okay? So maybe it's better to do the picture. So suppose that n is here. Okay, so I draw the graph of the random walk S first. So that's maybe something like this. Maybe something like this. Okay. So suppose this is capital S. And now, how do you get this? Well, you just have to change the system of coordinates. Imagine that maybe I can draw it in red. Okay. You look in this system of coordinates. And you look, okay, and I say that the graph that you get in this system of coordinates will be the graph of S hat nk. Okay? Well, when I'm doing it on slides, it's easier because you can turn the slide upside down and then you see it better. But you have to imagine that you look in this direction, and the graph of the function here now is the graph of this S hat n. Okay? So why do I say that now? Well, now, for instance, if I look at Sn minus In, well, maybe one more notation. I define, should be a more or less obvious notation. I define m hat nk as the maximum of S hat n up to time k. Okay, so it's the same notation as here, of course, except that I replace capital S by S hat n. Okay? And the first observation is that if I look at Sn minus In, this is in fact the same thing as m hat n at time n. Okay? Well, it's clear. What you do, if you want to compute this maximum, you take the maximum of these quantities here. So Sn does not depend on k, it remains. And the maximum of minus S, well, it's going to be minus In. Okay. Okay. So that's most obvious. So that's the first thing. And the second thing you can notice is that Hn, so you have to remember now this formula here. So maybe I will not write it for n, but for k here. No, for n, sorry, it's okay. So Hn is this quantity, and I claim that this is also the number of j belonging to one n, such that the random walk at time j is equal to its maximum up to time j. So if you want, these are the records, but for S hat n. Okay, so why is this true? So it's better to explain it on the picture. What is the definition of Hn? These are times count times j, such that at this time the random walk is equal to its minimum between j and n. So on my picture, for instance, you will count this time. You see here you are here you are equal in fact to the global minimum. But this time here also works. You are equal to the minimum between this time and n. This time also works. Okay? Now if you turn the picture upside down, you see that in the red system of coordinates, these are times where the random walk is equal to its past maximum. Okay? you look in the other way around, these are the times of records. Okay? So you get this. Okay, so why is this useful? Well, what you see is that the pair Sn minus In and Hn is equal to a certain function, which I call Fn, of, it's completely determined by this S hat n. It's a certain function of this path Sn0, S hat n. And the function is not anything. It's exactly the function, the same function, that gives you that the maximum of the random walk and the number of records is equal to Fn of S0, S1, Sn. Okay? Okay? Just have to look at these two formulas and you get this. Okay? Mm-hmm. So essentially, each of these two pairs is equal to the same function of, well, two n plus 1 tuples, which have the same distribution. So, of course, they have also the same distribution. Okay? So that's very elementary. I gave all details, but no question about that. So this implies once you have this and this, well, they must have the same distribution. Okay, so now let me come back to the theorem. So maybe we can just erase that. Well, I'm going to need, in fact, another lemma. Take that as lemma 2. I will introduce, in fact, the successive record times. Okay, so the first one will be U0 equals 0, and for any k greater than 1, let me do it this way, any k positive, uk plus 1 will be the first n after uk, where the random walk is equal to its maximum. Okay? So I told you before that the random walk S is recurrent. Okay, so all these times are going to be finite and well defined, because these are the times at which you are equal to the maximum. Okay? So the lemma says that the random variables, I look, in fact, at how much the maximum increases at a new record time. So it's going to be SUK plus 1 minus SUK. These random variables have the same distribution. And in fact, distribution is known explicitly. I can look at the first one simply, and the first one is just SU1. I claim that the probability that SU1 is equal to M is equal to nu of the interval M infinity. Okay, so there are two parts in the lemma. This one is very easy if you know a little bit of Markov chains, okay? Because it's just the strong Markov property for the random walk. Okay? So maybe I don't do that because it would take too much time. But it's really very easy. Okay? If you don't see it at all, you come and see me. This one is not obvious. Okay? Okay, I call this star. So maybe I'm not going to prove that immediately, because I prefer to do it later, maybe after the break. I prefer to finish the proof of the theorem. So this is, of course, for any non-negative M. As this SU1 is the first record, it has to be at least equal to 0. Okay, okay, so a consequence of the lemma, in fact, of this formula star here, you can compute the expected value of SU1. Okay, so maybe I should have drawn a small picture. So your random walk starts from here. It may spend some time in the negative axis, but eventually, at some step, if you want, it will come above 0. This is U1, and in fact, this is SU1. Okay, so SU1 may be equal to 0, in fact, and you may just arrive at 0 here. So you can compute expected value here. So what do you do? Well, since you know the distribution, well, you compute it. And what does it give to you? Maybe I will do the calculation. So nu of the interval m infinity is the sum from j equals m to infinity of nu of j. And then you interchange the two sums. Okay? So what you get is the sum from j equals m to infinity of nu of j times. So what you will get after interchanging, you will have to sum for the values of m between 0 and j, because m has to be smaller than j, of m. Okay, so what you get is j times j plus 1 of 2. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there is no m here, I'm sorry, it's 0. Okay, just by interchanging the sums you find that, okay? And now there is a small trick, which is to say, well, instead of summing from j equals 0, I'm going to sum from j equals minus 1 to infinity. And of course, this does not change anything, because if j equals minus 1, this term is 0, okay? Okay. And now I separate, I have a sum here, I separate the two terms, but I know that the sum of j nu of j is equal to 0, because I told you that nu is centered, okay? Okay? So it means that you can just erase this one, and I get sum from j equals minus 1 to infinity of j squared over 2 nu of j. And this is just the variance of nu, which is sigma square. So the result is that finally you get here sigma square over 2. Okay? Okay, so it's a simple calculation. So why is this useful? Well, okay, essentially remember this lemma. What I'm interested in is this Hn. Okay, so the relation between Hn and Sn minus In is the same as the relation between Kn and Mn. Okay, where you understand the lemma. So I'm going to try to compare Kn to Mn. Okay. So then I will observe that what is Mn? So Mn is the maximum of the random walk. It's also, well, if you want, it's the value of the random walk at the last record before time n. Okay? And the last record before time n is what I call ukn. Okay? So this quantity is the last record time before n. Okay? Because since it's the last record, well, you don't hit a higher value after that time. Okay? By definition. Okay? Okay? So it's just a consequence of the definitions. So Kn was here. Okay. Kn was the number of records before n. And then, well, I'm going to write this in the form sum from j equals 1 to Kn of Suj minus Suj minus 1. Okay? So, well, it's clear. This is just a telescopic sum. If you do this sum, all terms cancel except the last one, which gives you Sukn. Okay? So if you want, each of these terms is the quantity by which you increase your record when you have a new record time. Okay? Now I'm going to use the lemma, which tells you that all these random variables here are independent. Okay? And they have a mean which is equal to, this is a calculation I did there, which is equal to sigma square over 2. And you just use now the law of large numbers. And it tells you that if you divide this sum here by kn, well, it converges to the mean and the mean is what I computed here, sigma square over 2. Okay? So of course, usually when you apply the law of large numbers, you take a sum up to a deterministic time. Okay? Here it's a random time. This kn is random, but the important thing is that kn tends to infinity. This is just the fact that S is recurrent. You will have more and more record times if n is large. And then since it is an almost sure convergence, the law of large numbers, you can also apply it to something random that tends to infinity. It works perfectly well. Okay? Okay, so this is what I wanted to obtain because now I will apply my first lemma. This ratio, Mn over Kn, has the same distribution as this ratio here, Sn minus In over Hn. Okay, so there is a slight subtlety here. I know that for each fixed n, this random variable here has the same law as this one. Okay? But I cannot deduce from the almost sure convergence here that I have also almost sure here. Because, okay, you can find counter examples. Okay? But the fact that you have convergence in probability remains valid if you replace here each term of your sequence by a random variable having the same law, provided you have convergence probability to a constant, which is the case here. Okay. So that's nice for us because remember the theorem. I told you before that we are interested in this h here, which is, well, it's a functional of the random walk, but not a very nice functional. But essentially, what we have done, we have shown here that Hn behaves essentially like another functional, this Sn minus In, which is a very good functional of the random walk. Okay? And I explained that to you at the beginning, that you can get a scaling limit both for Sn and for In. Okay? So now, just to finish the argument, so Dansker is telling you, well, I will deal only with a finite dimensional convergence. Okay? So I take T1 smaller than T2 smaller than Tk. I will comment on that afterwards. Well, the result I stated before tells you that if you rescale, so in fact I will rescale this function here, Sn minus In. So I look at it at time T1, then at time T2 and so on, at time Tk. Here I take, okay, here it will be more convenient for me to take integer parts. Well, it's not very important, in fact. Okay, rather than doing the linear interpolation, but it is more or less equivalent. Okay, okay. So you know that this vector converges in distribution. Well, for S, you get Brownian motion, so at time T1 for the first component. And for I, this is what I stated to you before, you get the minimum, which I denoted by B underlined times T1, and so on. Okay. So this is true for any vector. In fact, I stated something more general, deeper than that, but it's true when you look only at a finite number of times, you get this. Okay. So now what happens for, this is not the thing I want to study. The thing I want to study is H. But you see, you have this convergence in probability, or if you prefer, in the other way around, Hn of you just take the inverse, Sn of minus In converges also in probability to 2 over sigma square. You just take the inverse, okay? So you multiply, so each term here, I'm going to multiply it by a term, which will be S minus I divided by H at the same time here, which converges in probability to a constant, okay? So essentially, you multiply each term here by something that converges in probability to sigma square over 2, okay? And this will not change the convergence in probability. If you have a sequence that converges in probability to something, you multiply it by something that converges in probability to, say, to 1, for instance, convergence in distribution still works, okay? So it will tell you that now at the same finite times, this vector here will converge in distribution. Well, the limit is going to be multiplied by 2 over sigma square. So you'll get 2 over sigma. And essentially, otherwise, the same vector, 2 over sigma here as here. Okay? So is it clear how you go from here to here? Just multiplying each term in your sequence by something that converges in probability to a constant. This does not destroy the convergence in distribution. Okay? You multiply this term by HPT1 divided by that, which converges to 2 over p squared. Okay, so this is the convergence I had here. So remember that, okay, I told you gamma was this. Okay, this is what we get here. But I have not proved completely the theorem. Why? Because I get only the convergence of finite dimensional marginals. And if you are a bit used to these kind of asymptotic results, usually it requires some work. If you want to get here, it's a convergence in the functional sense, as explained in the beginning. It's stronger than this convergence where I had to take only finitely many times. Okay. So essentially, what is missing? So no question about the proof? No? So what is missing for the theorem? So what is missing in the proof? Basically, you use two ingredients. You use Donsker theorem. So this is, okay, I told you this is in the functional sense. No problem for that. But the other ingredient is this. The fact that you can replace your H by Sn minus In. Okay. And this one, if you want, it's not functional. Okay, so you need to reinforce this. And this has to be reinforced to something like this. While you are going to take the supplemum, you take something, you want a kind of uniformity in this convergence. So what you do, you take the supplemum of all S less than t, so for, say, any t positive, and you look at H at time Ps, you subtract 2 over sigma square S at, well, here you can take, well, it doesn't matter, you can take the linear interpolation if you want. Okay, take this supplemum, you normalize it, well, the scaling is always 1 over square root of p, and you want to say that this converges in probability to 0. Okay. So you want this kind of uniform version of this convergence here. Okay. And that, okay, if you can prove that, then it's very easy to use combined Donsker theorem with this, and you immediately get what I stated here. Okay, so because you, okay, just have to think of what it means to have a convergence in the functional sense. Okay. So you need that, and well, it's not so clear how you can deduce it from this, but this is not too difficult to prove. I will write easy in quotation marks if mu has exponential moments. This is true in general. You can prove it quite generally, but if mu has exponential moments, you can do some simple estimates, some large deviations estimates, in fact, or moderate deviations estimates to see that this works. Okay, so I'm not going to do it. Maybe you will see it in the exercises, or you can look in the reference I mentioned in the beginning of the lectures. Okay, so I think it's a good time to have the break, unless you have a question. Okay, let's have the break. Okay, so let's start again. So I'm going to prove this, okay? Well, maybe if you have a shorter proof, yeah, I'm interested, yeah. But you will see the proof. Well, it's not very difficult, but still you have to write certain things. And it's something, you see, okay, what is this U1? This is your random walk. It's the first time it becomes, after 0, when it becomes greater than or equal to 0. If you want, U1 is, by definition, look at the definition, the minimum k greater than 1, such that sk is not negative. Okay. So what is important to derive this formula is the fact that your random walk has negative jumps only of size -1. Okay? You remember nu, which is a jump distribution, charges -1 plus infinity, but not negative numbers smaller than -1. Okay? Okay, so you can have negative jumps of size -1. You can have positive jumps of any size. So you can jump above 0, across 0, as on my picture. Okay? But the calculation I'm going to do works well only because of the special properties that you have negative jumps only of size -1. Okay, so let me start the calculation with some general remarks. So I know that S is recurrent as a Markov chain. And in fact, it is known, it is an irreducible, it's clearly irreducible as a Markov chain. It has a unique invariant measure. And of course, an invariant measure for random walk is always well, it's always true that the counting measure, if you want kappa of k equals 1 for any k belonging to z. So this is a counting measure. It's always invariant for random walk, but here in addition, you know, it's a unique invariant measure because of recurrence. Okay? If you have a transient random walk on z, you can have other invariant measures. Okay? So this is, okay, Markov chain theory. And moreover, something you know also is that you can recover the invariant measure in the following way. You look at the first return to 0. So I will call this time R0. The first time you come back to 0. Okay? And of course, look at the definitions. This R0 is always greater than this U1. Okay? Okay. But you can have this situation here, R0 strictly greater than U1. If you cross here the origin becoming strictly positive, then you will have to wait for some time until you go back to 0. Okay? So what is the relation with invariant measure? Well, it's again a general fact for recurrent Markov chains that if you look at the expected value of the sum from k equals 1 to R0 minus 1, so this is essentially you sum over times belonging to the first excursion away from 0. You start from 0 and you wait until your random walk comes back to 0, and you are going to count how many times you have visited, say, an integer j. This gives you always, this is a general Markov chain theory, this gives you always the invariant measure as a function of j. And here the invariant measure, we know it. We know it's the constant counting measure. Okay, so this is true for any j belonging to C. Okay. Okay. So we have this property, and we have something more. If we assume now that j is negative or 0, okay, then I can replace R0 here by U1. Why? I claim that this expected value is in fact the same as the one that is above. So why is it true? Well, look at the picture. After time U1, in any case, you stay positive until you come back to 0. So if j is negative, in this sum, there will be no contribution for k greater than U1. Okay, the two sums are the same. Okay? Okay? So now, I need something more. If I have a function g, any function g from Z, well, into R plus, say. Suppose I look at the expected value of the sum from k equals 0 to U1 minus 1 of g of Sk. Okay? So how can I compute that? Well, it's very easy. I can just say that I look at all the possible values. Okay. No, let's do it that way. I look at all the possible values of Sk, so I sum over j. So possible values of Sk, because I am before U1, so before becoming again non-negative, certainly the only values that may occur are negative values, non-positive values. Indicator function of Sk equals j, g of j. Okay, so this is trivial. I just said that I replace g of Sk by this sum. And in this sum, there is only one indicator which is equal to 1. What am I saying? Well, just the sum for I got j of k equals sk. And so I get g of sk. Okay? And if I exchange the sum, I see that I'm going to have to compute this quantity here. Okay? And what I get is just this sum. Okay, I exchange the sums, sum over j negative, g of j, and then I have the expected value I'm considering here, which is equal to 1. Okay, so all this is quite elementary. Okay, so now what do we do? Okay, we try to compute the expected value of a function g of SU1. And again, I'm going to write this in a seemingly more complicated form. I'm going to sum from j equals 0 to infinity the indicator function that j is less than u1, the indicator function that sj plus 1 is non-negative, and then g of sj plus 1. So, okay. So you may say it's a very complicated way of writing things, but essentially, again, there will be just one value of j in this sum for which the product of these indicator functions is equal to 1, and the unique possible value is j equals u1 minus 1. If you have j equals u1 minus 1, this holds. This holds also because this is the definition of u1. At time u1, you are here. You are positive. And then this will give you g of su1 as you want. Okay, so just a complicated way of writing the same thing. Okay, okay, so now you have this, and what you do, well, you exchange the sum here with expectation. And then you are going to apply the Markov property. Okay. So this event here is measurable with respect to your random walk up to time j. Okay. If you know your random walk up to time j, you know, well, if you have not become non-negative, if you have not become positive at that time, you know if this is true. And so you use the fact that if you want conditionally on S0, Sj, Sj plus 1 has the same distribution as Sj plus say, psi distributed according to mu. Okay? Okay? And so you look at the possible values, if you want, of the increment. So sum from L equals -1 to infinity of mu of L. And then what you want Sj plus L to be non-negative, and G of Sj plus L. Okay. Just look at the conditional distribution of Sj plus 1, knowing what happens before time j. Well, I summed of from L equals -1 to infinity, but in fact, I can take instead of -1, 0, because if L is equal to -1, I have no chance to have this property here, because I already know that Sj is non-negative, non-positive. If I add -1, it will certainly not become positive. Okay. Okay? Mm-hmm. And now you just exchange the sums. Okay, I hope I'm going to do it properly. Mu of L. Then you will have expected value of sum from j equals 0. So here I will have the indicator function j less than u1, so I can sum up to u1 minus 1. I have indicator of Sj plus L non-negative, j of Sj plus L. Okay. And now you see this is expected value of a sum of this type here, okay? Except that I replaced k by j, but okay. But essentially it's a sum between 0 and u1 minus 1 of a certain function applied to Sj here, okay? So I use, if you want this equality here, I use this star to write that this is the sum from L equals 0 to infinity of mu of L. Sum of all, prefer to write maybe k negative here, this sum. What is the function you have? The function is here, the indicator function of k plus L non-negative, g of k plus L. Okay, it's a function I'm considering here. Okay. And now, well, you just have to, again, to exchange the sums, and I let you check that this is the same as the sum from m equals 0 to infinity of g of m, mu of m infinity. Okay? You just have to make the change of variable. You call this m, and you count the terms that you have. Okay, so this gives you what you wanted, that the law of SU1 is given by that. Okay, maybe I spent too much time on that. It's really an exercise in Markov chain theory, okay? And, so if you have a simpler proof, I'm willing to have it, because it's not very difficult, but if you write the details, it takes some time. Yeah? But it's at some level, it's elementary. You can do it if you know a little bit of Markov chain theory, this uniqueness of invariant measure, and the fact that you have this property. But the fact that you can construct the invariant measure in this way, it's often the way you construct, in fact, the invariant measure in the case of a recurrent Markov chain. Okay. And then, okay, it's more some calculations. Are there any question about that? Okay, I wanted to do it. It's not, it's not very funny maybe, but still it's deeper. Okay, there are other versions of the result in continuous time and so on. It's not, well, it's really a result that comes up in different contexts. Okay, I will come back to trees. So now I've proved completely the lemma, this lemma. So I told you before I'm not giving the full proof of the theorem, but we are very close to it, in fact. So. Now, a question I want to address is, well, we have obtained the result here for this height process here, which corresponds to a sequence of trees. Well, what does it say if you take a single tree? Okay, you don't want to take an infinite sequence, you want to take just one tree. Okay, but you want to take one tree, you want to have information about one tree conditioned to be large. Okay, so maybe applications to large Galton-Watson trees. And what do I mean by large? I'm going to do some conditioning. So notation for p greater than 1, I will write it in this way, theta brace p. And this will be a mu Galton-Watson tree, so always same thing, but I will do some conditioning. I will force my tree to be large in some sense. Okay, so the way I will force it to be large, I will condition it to have a height which is at least square root of p. So what is the height of the tree? So h of a tree tau is just the maximal generation in the tree. Okay? So it's a way of conditioning a tree to be large. I could have conditioned it also to have a large total progeny, a large number of vertices, and the same techniques would apply. Okay. But I will consider that. So you may be puzzled why I put square root of p here and not p. I could do it also with p. Okay, so but for me it will be technically it will be just a little bit easier if I put square root of p there. But it's so don't be disturbed by the fact I put the square root here. So essentially, I want to understand now. Well, again, what is the height process? What can we say about the height process of this tree? Okay, so HPK for k between 0 and the number of vertices of p. This is what I defined the last time. This is the height process or function of theta p. Okay, so it's a way of coding the tree. And now, well, I want this to be defined for any k. So if you want by convention, h brace p k will be equal to 0 for k greater than the number of vertices of p. Okay, so now I want to say, well, do I have some analog of this theorem if I take just one tree and this tree here conditioned to be large? And in fact, this works. So I state it as a corollary. We have So I do exactly the same rescaling. As in the theorem. But the limit is going to be different because I have just one tree, and the limit is what we call a Brownian excursion. So I will define it, and I write it in this way. Okay, you still have these constants, 2 over sigma. Don't pay too much attention to the constant. I write here something like E sigma over 2 at time t, where E sigma over 2 is a Brownian excursion with height greater than sigma over 2. Okay, so as you multiply, you multiply here by 2 over sigma, so it will have, once you multiply by the constant, it will have height greater than 1, in fact, which is what you want to get. Okay, so how can we define this object, this Brownian excursion? Well, you start from reflected Brownian motion. So suppose this is this gamma t I had before. So it's going to do things like this. So suppose this is the level here. This is sigma over 2. So it's going to do things like this. And eventually, it's going to hit sigma over 2, because you know that Brownian motion hits any level. And then it comes back and so on. Okay. So that's your reflected Brownian motion. Remember, it's the absolute value of a linear Brownian motion. Okay? It's the same distribution. So what you do, you look at the excursion that contains, if you want, the heading time of sigma over 2. So I call this capital T. Okay. I look then at the last 0 before capital T, so I call this G. So it's the supremum of T less than capital T, where gamma T is equal to 0. So G is for gauche in French, so it's for left, if you want, because it's the first 0 to the left of capital T. Okay? And similarly, I will call capital D for droite. It's the first 0 after capital T. Okay? So this is going to be G here. This is going to be D. And now, what is my Brownian excursion with height greater than sigma over 2? Well, I just look at my path here of a reflected Brownian motion between these two times. Okay, so I take, if you want, E sigma over 2t to be gamma. I look at gamma, but after time G. Okay, and I stop it. Okay, if you are familiar with this notation, it's the infimum. I stop it at time capital T. Okay, so that's the definition of my random function here. Okay. Okay, so I really look at this object here. Okay, so the limit you get for the height process of a single Galton-Watson condition to be large, in the sense I explained, will be just a Brownian excursion. So this should not come really as a surprise, because remember, so I will try to explain it and also to give you the idea of the proof. So remember that in the discrete setting, so idea, what do we have in the discrete setting? Well, remember, I was considering a sequence, theta 1, theta 2. Okay, I was looking at the height function for this sequence, and this is the picture I did in the beginning. You know, I had, okay, I'm not going to Okay. Maybe you have something like that. And I told you that each excursion away from 0, by that I mean my process H between two successive zeros, each such excursion corresponds to one tree in the sequence. Okay? Etc. So if you want the values of H on such an excursion, if you just shift time properly, they will give you the height function of one of the trees in the sequence. Okay? Now, the remark we can do is that suppose we want to find a tree which has this distribution here. So we can take this theta brace P, we can take it to be the first tree in the sequence with height at least square root of P. So eventually here, there will be a first tree in the sequence with height greater than square root of P. So it's the same as saying that the maximum of the height function is greater than square root of P, and so here it will be this tree here. Okay? Okay? Why can we take theta brace P in this way? Well, it's only elementary probability. You want to condition a certain distribution on a certain event. Well, you just throw a sequence of IID random variables according to this distribution, and you look at the first one, which satisfies the event you want to have. Okay. So, if we want to prove this corollary, we can just take for the tree theta brace P the first tree with height greater than P in my sequence. Okay, that's clear? Okay, so now what do we say? Well, I already explained it a little bit at this level. This means that if I look at the height function which I denoted by H brace P, this will also be the first excursion away from 0. Well, let's say the first excursion of H with height greater than square root of P. Okay, this is what I'm trying to explain here on the picture. Each excursion, so I repeat, by excursion I mean the part of the path between two successive zeros. Each excursion corresponds to one tree. And the height of the excursion, it's also the generation, the maximal generation in the tree. It's also the height of the tree. Okay? So the excursion that will correspond to theta brace P will be the first one here with height greater than square root of P. Okay? So that looks very good. Now you can look at 1 over square root of P. You rescale everything. This is also the first excursion of your rescale. Okay. So you do the rescaling, so you multiply everything by 1 over square root of P, so it will have a height greater than 1 simply. Okay. So it's just scaling. And now you say, well, this object here, I know what it does asymptotically, the theorem. It converges to this reflected Brownian motion, or multiplied by the constant 2 over sigma. Okay? And so you may say now, well, this object, if you want, after rescaling, is going to converge to your reflected Brownian motion. And suppose you have rescaled it. Okay, if you rescaled it, you will have 1 here. Okay? And so the first excursion with height greater than 1, well, you expect that it will converge to the first excursion here, also with height greater than 1. Okay? So you say that this converges by the theorem, still up there, to the first excursion of, well, the limiting process greater than 1. And this is what I get here. Okay, okay, so this is the idea. Now, what is the weak part of the argument? There is a weak part, which is that the first excursion with height greater than 1 is not a continuous functional of the path here. Okay? So you cannot immediately use a theorem. Okay? You cannot just say this converges in distribution to this. If I take a good function of this, say a continuous function of this, it's going to converge to the same continuous function of the limit. This is what I would like to use, and the function I would apply to this or to this would be the first excursion with height greater than 1. But it's not a good function. It's not continuous with respect to the topology you have, and so you need to make something more. And unfortunately, I still have time to do it. So no, it's not very difficult. I will do it because it's technical, of course. Here you have all the idea of the theorem, and then you say, well, certainly it works. If you try to be rigorous, you realize, well, I need to write a few more things. That's what I'm going to do. Okay? Any question about the idea? Looks reasonable. Okay. So I need to keep many things. Probably I should keep that. Okay, I don't need that anymore. So I erase the theorem, but we will use it, of course. Well, I will, in fact, rewrite it immediately. I will first give a slightly more precise form of the theorem I just erased. Okay. So for this, I need one more notation. Sorry for that. I will call lambda n. I come back to the random walk. Lambda n will be the cardinality of the set j less than n, where aj is equal to 0. And this is the same, in fact, as minus the minimum of in, and I think I forget something there. I have a plus 1, okay. Okay, so remember that Sn, so what was in? In was the minimum of the random walk. So H, I don't rewrite the formula, but the point is that you can check that Aj is equal to 0 well, if and only J corresponds to the visit, I say it in words, it's simpler, of the root of one tree. And remember this picture I drawn in the beginning, when you have your random walk S, you start exploring the first tree. This is S, and then you start exploring the first tree, and the time you finish exploring the first tree, you are at -1. You arrive at level -1. Okay, so, and then you start again, you visit the second tree, and when you finish exploring the second tree, you are at -2 and so on. Okay, so maybe you do that and that again and so on. Okay, so the times of visits of the roots of the trees, they correspond to the hitting times of negative levels. Okay, okay? So let's continue like this, for instance. So suppose that n is here. you see that this corresponds to the first 3 theta 1, to the second, to the third. And you see that in this example, you have my capital lambda n is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is the same as, in fact, the index, if you want, of the tree I'm visiting at time n. And this is the same as minus the minimum. Minus the minimum is 3 here, plus 1, okay? So proof by example, the formula works, okay? But you can check for yourself, it's very easy, okay? There's nothing deep there, okay? So why do I say that? Well, this lambda n is useful because, as I said, what it does, it records the index of the tree you are visiting. It says that, well, at time n, I am visiting the tree with index lambda n. Okay, so, okay, I don't say too much about that. What am I going to use? I'm going to use the fact that the theorem can be extended to, I don't only look my process H as in the theorem, but I'm also going to look at this lambda. So I do the same rescaling for lambda. And I have a convergence in distribution to what? Well, the first coordinate we've seen, it's sigma times bt. And the second coordinate, oh, I'm sorry, it's not sigma times bt. It's 2 over sigma times bt. Sorry. And it's not bt, it's gamma t. Well, you can, in the proof, we could write it as bt minus the infimum. Okay. This is what we got, in fact, in the proof. This is what I called gamma t. And what about the second coordinate? Well, for the second coordinate, it's easy because this is the infimum of your random walk, and the infimum is a nice continuous functional. I mentioned that in the beginning, in the first part of the lecture. So for this coordinate, you will just get minus the infimum, and there is this constant sigma in Donskoy's theorem. Okay, so really, so I'm not cheating here. It's really, once you have the theorem, this comes immediately. Okay, just. Okay, so what can we say about that? Well, of course, the limit, as I said here, you can rewrite it also in the form gamma t, and this, well, 2 over sigma gamma t. This thing here can also be interpreted, I write it in this way, as a local time at 0 of gamma t. Okay, so I don't expect that you know much about local time. I'm just going to explain that in a minute. You don't really need it, but I think it's good to have this interpretation, even to follow what will come later. Okay, so what is this gamma t? The best thing to do is to do a picture again. So this gamma t is a reflected Brownian motion. And this local time, it's a continuous increasing process. It increases with t. That counts, in some sense, the number of visits of gamma as 0. Okay? So I put counts between quotation marks because, of course, there is an infinite number of visits of 0, so it's not just counting, it's a kind of measuring the number of visits of gamma at 0 up to time t here, I should say. Okay. So this is the local time. Okay, so the theorem I mentioned before, that this process here, the Brownian motion minus its infimum, is a reflected Brownian motion. In fact, the good version of the theorem tells you that not only you have this, but this minus the infimum of the Brownian motion is equal to the local time at 0 of gamma. Okay? But the only thing I'm going to use is the fact that when your gamma comes back to 0, the local time increases. And you can also view it in this form. When your Brownian motion hits its past infimum, well, the past infimum will decrease. Okay? So suppose you can do it this way. Suppose that you have your Brownian motion, okay, something like this. So the next time is, so here is the past infimum, if you want, if t, okay, so suppose this is b half t, and you let your Brownian motion evolve until the moment when it hits that level, and then because of the property of Brownian motion, immediately after, it will become even smaller. So this means that, well, this process underline b will decrease. Okay? So what I'm saying is that when this thing is going to vanish, this thing is going to increase with the sign minus. Okay? So this is what I'm going to use. That you see the second coordinate, it records in some sense when this first coordinate vanishes. Okay, maybe I don't want to say more about that. I will come back to the proof of the corollary. So okay, so we have this result, and now I'm going to use another ingredient which is often useful in such limit theorem, which is saying that each time you have a convergence in distribution, there is a theorem due to Skorokhod, which is telling you that you can transform this convergence into an almost sure convergence. Okay? Meaning that you can find processes, I'm going to denote them by H parenthesis P, and another one which I denote by lambda parenthesis P, which has the same distribution as this one. For each fixed P, they have the same distribution. But such that now, instead of having just a convergence in distribution here, I will have now a convergence almost surely. Okay, such that now okay, the limit is still the same. If you want, I write it in the same way. So maybe it's better to write it this way, 2 over sigma gamma t, sigma lt. So this will be almost sure, and it's a convergence of random continuous functions, so it's uniformly on every compact, if you want. Uniformly on compacts, and almost surely. Okay, so why is it going to help us? Well, because it's easier to make arguments with almost sure convergence. Okay, so I will use this almost sure convergence, and okay, remember what I want to consider. So recall. What I want to consider is this rescaled height process. I told you before that it can be viewed as the first excursion of this one with height greater than 1. Okay? But since they have the same distribution, I can as well say that it's the first excursion of this one with height greater than 1. Okay, I just change it. They have the same distribution. So I want to prove a convergence in distribution, so I can change each of my variables with one having the same distribution. Okay. And maybe I'm going to define this in a cleaner way. So I will introduce Tp, which is infimum of T positive where this object here is greater than 1. And okay, I do the same as here. I introduce the first 0 to the left, the first 0 to the right. Okay, so to the left it's GP, so the sup of T less than TP. Where this is 0, and dP will be the first 0 to the right. Okay, so now what do I mean by first excursions? I mean that I look at HP at time GP plus T infimum dP. Okay, so instead of considering this object, I can consider this one. Okay, they have the same distribution. Okay, so now it becomes maybe a little bit easier. What you have to prove is that this quantity is going to converge to this quantity multiplied by, well, you have, I suppose you have 2 over sigma. Okay, okay, so need to prove. I can explain that. Need to prove the quantity which is there. This HP GP plus T infimum dP converges as P tends to infinity to the limit which is there, which is, okay, you want to have 2 over sigma. This, well, I take this definition, this gamma G plus T infimum T. Okay? And you want this, say, uniformly, almost surely. Okay. So we are not in a too bad situation. Essentially, now you do a deterministic argument. You use the fact that, okay, you have your function HP, and you know that they converge. Now it's now an almost true convergence here. You know that converge to the function 2 over sigma gamma. And you know that this convergence is uniform on every compact. Okay, that's nice. So really, this HP here is going to be close to this process. Now you just have to look at the times at which you consider your processes. Okay? So it will be enough to prove that GP converges to G and dP converges to T. Okay, remember what is GP? So GP, so let's say this is the heating time of 1 here, dP. So this is GP and this is dP. And here it's the same, you have the heating time of 1, and which is here, capital T, and this is G, this is D. Okay, so since your function here, they converge uniformly to this one, if you can prove that the times here, GP and dP, they converge to G and D, then very easily, well, immediately you will get this convergence here. Okay? And so very easy to see that the first heating time of 1 here will converge to the first heating time of 1 here. Okay? Just so that. Now, what is not obvious is that this implies that GP converges to G and dP converges to D. Because this function, the last 0 before something, it's not really something which is continuous for the topology of a uniform convergence on functions. Okay. So you see, what might occur, I should finish soon, what might occur is that, so suppose that your limiting function is something like this. Of course, it's a false picture, but suppose that this is 2 over sigma gamma. And suppose your approximating function, they do something like this, but here they don't vanish. They stay at epsilon positive, and the same here, maybe they don't vanish here, they vanish later. So you see, perhaps for the white function, the last 0, which I call this G here, will be here. And for the approximating function, perhaps the last zero will be here. Okay? The uniform convergence do not guarantee you that the last zeros will converge for the sequence. Okay? Okay, but still, you can think a little bit about it. So what this implies very easily is the fact that, for instance, the lim sup of GP is also less than G, almost surely, and the lim inf of dp is greater than D, almost surely. Okay? It's because you see your limiting function, if you take here, for instance, G plus epsilon, and here D minus epsilon, your limiting function will be bounded below by a positive constant on this interval here. And so the rate function, because it converges uniformly, it will have to be positive also on this interval. Okay? So it gives you a property like this. Okay? So that's not enough. Okay? What you want is really the convergence here. And to do that, so this is the last thing I want to say. For instance, how do you get, well, the other bound? For instance, you don't need only that, you need also the same with the lim sup. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take any S positive. I'm going to look at the event where D is less than S. Okay, so now on this event, so it means that S is going to be somewhere here. On this event, well, I use the fact that the local time at 0, this is now where I'm going to use this capital L here. The fact that the local time at 0 is going to increase immediately when I come back to 0. So the local time at 0 at S is going to be greater than the local time at 0 at D. Okay? And now another property of local time, which you can read as well on this representation here if you prefer, is the fact that the local time increases only when you are at 0. So it will be the same here and here. Okay? So this is the same as the local time at capital T. Okay? And now I use the fact that Tp converges to T, and the fact that my processes lambda p here, they converge to the local time. So this object, in fact, is going to converge to Lt. So it's going to be greater than no, sorry. Excuse me. I'm saying that lambda ps is going to be greater than lambda p dp. Okay, because this object here is converging to this by the convergence that I already know, and this object converges to this, well, again by this convergence here. Okay. Convergence here, which is uniform and so on. Okay. And now this property, the fact that, remember what was doing lambda p, it was counting the number of times that h spans at 0. So this property implies, well, between Tp and dp, on my picture, between Tp and dp, the process h does not come back to 0, okay? Or the rescaled version, which is here. So the fact that you have these strict inequalities, this implies that S is greater than dp, okay? Because Hp does not increase on the interval which I called Tp dp. Okay, because it's the same thing. You just have to, not Hp, lambda p, sorry. The fact that lambda counts the number of passages at 0, and your process H, rescaled, it does not hit 0 on this interval, okay? Okay, so what you get is that if you know that D is less than S, well, I should have said here, this is for P large enough. Well, and so this also is true for P large. If you know that D is smaller than S, you also get that dP is smaller than S for P large. Okay, so this is exactly the same as saying that the lim sup of dP is less than T. Okay, okay. So this gives you well, the other direction. So this one is very easy. You can think about it. But for this one, you need to use these local times or something like that. But it's not too difficult, but it's a bit technical. Okay. Okay, so this last proof was maybe a little bit more involved. Okay, so don't worry if you found it very difficult. But I just wanted to explain. The idea is very general. I mean, it can be used for other conditioning of random trees, and you need to do something like this. When you want to deal with a single tree, just one tree conditioned to be large, you can use the theorem, but you need some technical work to apply it. Okay? So next week, so next Tuesday, we will come back to different things. Maybe I will start speaking about continuous random trees and explaining the relations with discrete trees. I will also give you maybe some more concrete applications of the theorem I just proved, just showing that this gives really information about the trees. Okay, so I was too long, so we should stop now.